Welcome to those who've just joined us. Just going to
Looking good,
say
Pip.
karakia. Mō ora kia mātou arahina mātou ia mātou mahi. Ke mihia he huiaraha mō te kaupapa. O te matauranga hangarau, a whina atu, a whina mai, te pau e here nei e mātou. Hui e, tai ki e. All right, so get ready to be inspired. We are thrilled to introduce Boo Windsor, a remarkable educator with an incredible 45-year journey in teaching, leadership, and creative exploration. Boo's passion for discovering new ideas and places has taken her from the majestic peaks of Ōtautahi Mount Cook, where she lived and worked for 23 years, to the frozen frontiers of Antarctica as part of the Antarctica New Zealand Educators to Antarctica program. She's trekked through the Himalayas to Everest Advanced Base Camp, experiencing both the Nepalese and Tibetan sides, and even ventured into the realms of space education as an attendee of the prestigious Educators to Base Camp. Today, Boo will take us on an exhilarating journey to the Antarctic Centre, sharing how we can inspire and educate others about the wonders and critical importance of the icy continent. Get ready to be captivated by her stories and insights. Over to you, Boo. So you can now share
Yep.
your screen.
Okay, I'm just getting to that point. Share, and there. Hopefully everybody can see that image
It's
that
great,
I've
Boo. You're
presented
good to
there.
go.
Fantastic. So that was quite the introduction. Now I'll have to try and live up to it a little bit. So just want to welcome everybody to the International Antarctic Centre, and it's my pleasure to take you on a virtual tour this afternoon. So I do have the privilege of being the educator here at the Antarctic Centre, and in my role I work with learners of all ages, early childhood right through to tertiary, and from all over the world. We have a lot of New Zealand schools, but also international students, as well as special interest groups, such as the Smithsonian Institute study tours. So I'm lucky to have interaction with a lot of people. So let's begin our tour. My slide. So we have at the centre here a mission, and our mission is to educate and excite people about the wonders, the uniqueness, and the importance of Antarctica. We hope to inspire all our guests to take a kaitiakitanga role to protect Antarctica for present and for future generations. Our motto of see it, love it, save it seeks to influence people by hoping that they go through the process of when I see it, I understand it, and when I understand it, I care, and when I care, I take action. So that's our mission here. We are based out by the airport in Christchurch. This is a bird's eye view of our campus. So the little pizza-shaped slice of pizza building up in the top right corner there is that's where we have the fun stuff here, the Antarctic Centre attraction. And the other two buildings, the big white buildings, are the workshop and warehouse and offices for the Antarctic programs that run out of here, which are the UK, the Korean, the Italian, and the New Zealand programs. Right round the outside of our campus, we've got a Hagglund course. Hagglunds are some people call them trucks or trains that travel the terrain down in Antarctica. And as part of our attraction, we like to take people for a bit of a bumpy ride around the outside there. Also, as part of this large photo, we're looking across in the top right corner to the Christchurch International Airport, and the piece of tarmac just beside those big blue buildings is where our large C-17 aircraft leave from to go down to Antarctica to take down the new crew and support people, cooks, chefs, domestics, anyone that's been lucky enough to have the opportunity to go down to Antarctica or leave from that little patch of tarmac opposite us. All right, so what is it like inside our building? So here's the inside of the Antarctic Centre. This is our lobby, and this is a typical busy morning where you can see people queuing up for the ticketing counter, a group over by our large map having a bit of a talk with one of the guides. And I've just got a wee bit of video rather here to play to show you what it's like as we move from our lobby through into our gift store and a little peek into our cafe. Now, it was quite early morning when I took that wee video, so not a lot of action happening yet in the cafe or in the gift store, but as you can see, it's quite popular with people all lining up there to get into the attraction. So what is it about the attraction that makes things so special? Well, when I take education groups, I like to start with a brief introduction to Antarctica. And I always start with this slide, Antarctica, the Great Southern Land. I'll usually be asking people if they know somebody that's been down there themselves. And it's amazing the number of people who've got a relative or a friend or can even just talk to some of the early explorers that have been down there. But I also then tell them that I took that photo when I was down in Antarctica in 2003. I was fortunate enough to go down there as an educator and created some resources for New Zealand schools on the geology of Antarctica, which for most part is a little bit tricky to study because most of it's under a couple of thousand meters of ice. But fortunately, they were good enough to find me a little patch that I could go and fossick around for rocks in. So this photo was taken in the dry valleys, the beautiful landscape inland there a bit. And as we try to engage our audience with the concept of Antarctica, we often have discussions about the fact that it wasn't always in the position it is now. It was once part of the great southern continent, Gondwanaland, where forests flourished and dinosaurs roamed. And this, of course, elicits a lot of discussion, particularly with younger children about, well, why was it there and how was it there and how do you know it was there? And this is where we can get out our range of rocks and fossils and actually show the plant imprints of those great forests that were there millions of years ago. And we can also show that we've got fossil ferns from the Antarctic region that match the fossil ferns from New Zealand regions. So that provides a bit of evidence for the fact that it was once upon a time a lot more temperate than it is now, and perhaps a little further north. When we head into our gallery area in our Antarctic Centre, we can see evidence of this in the fossils and artifacts that are on display there to help us understand that concept of the early beginnings of Antarctica and Antarctica's journey southward. Talking about journeys southward, one of the stories that we tell talks of Uie Te Rangiora. He was a Polynesian explorer about 1200 years ago, and he tells the story of moving down through the South Pacific, down south to where he saw white rocks that grow out of the sea. So it was an oral tradition. Nothing, of course, was ever written down at that stage, but we imagine that if he saw white rocks that grow out of the sea, it's quite possible he was as far down south into the Southern Ocean where some of those icebergs had carved off Antarctica. Nowadays in Te Reo, we call Antarctica Te Tiri o te Moana, that great place in the sea. One of the reasons why it's difficult to understand why it took so long to get people down there is because we need to remember that most of the territory, most of the land mass is up in the northern hemisphere, and there's actually very little down in the south. And these maps show the northern hemisphere land mass and the southern hemisphere land mass. And of course, this influenced population density and exploration. So it did take quite a while for other people to head down into that Southern Ocean. But head down they did in their droves, it seems, at one stage or another. So Captain James Cook was perhaps the first person to cross the Antarctic Circle. He who did a lot of exploring down here just in his sailing boat, no steamboats by that stage, no engines right back then. So he crossed the Antarctic Circle, and again, there were pictures that his crew had drawn of icebergs, so we know he did manage to navigate that far south. He was a great navigator, did a lot of recording of what he saw and where he was. After him, many others came, but one of the most prolific reasons why people ventured down south was because of the sealing and whaling that was carried on in those times. These were resources that were eagerly sought after by populations. Of course, the whale oil and whale blubber was used as the energy source for heating, lighting, and cooking, and seal fur was sought after for clothing. So some of the earliest people down there weren't there to discover territory so much as to mine the resources found in the marine environment. But then soon enough, along came others. Bellinghausen, John Davis was perhaps the first person to actually land on the continent itself. James Clark Ross went down there with his ships Erebus and Terror, and Mount Erebus is named after him. And then many others followed over the years in those early days of exploration. And what those people found when they went down there was a very large continent. So at first they weren't sure whether it was just one continent or lots of little islands all joined together, or was it just ice floating on water as it is up in the Arctic. But eventually it was discovered to be pretty much a continental mass, 50 times the size of Aotearoa and about twice the size of Australia. So a reasonably large landmass down there. And in finding that large landmass, they also then encountered some rather remarkable extreme environments. So there are four things that we often talk about in terms of Antarctica, and we like to ensure that our students that leave here have this knowledge with them, that it's the coldest, driest, windiest, highest continent on Earth. So the coldest ever recorded temperatures were recorded in Vostok Station in Antarctica, minus 89.2. In our centre here, we have a storm room, and our storm room just provides a bit of a fun experience for people. It gives them a feel of what it's like to be in a bit of an Antarctic condition. So the temperature in our storm room is always a balmy -8, but we do put a bit of wind in there, and that pulls the warmth away from one's bodies and makes it feel as if it's -18. So it gets a bit dark in there, it gets a bit noisy, it gets very windy. There's a little igloo that people can go and huddle in, and a lot of students like to do the penguin huddle thing as well. Outside the storm corridor, we've got a webcam, and that's showing live images from Antarctica, including the temperature conditions that are down there at the time. So we use those two areas, our storm room and our webcams, just to give people an idea of what the temperatures are like down there in that coldest continent on Earth. It's also the driest continent on Earth. So in Antarctica, because of its southern nature, it really doesn't get to have much moisture in the air because it's just simply too cold to hold moisture. So there's been no precipitation in the dry valleys, that deserty-like area there, for 6 million years. That glacier snaking down into the valley has just snuck its way over the Transantarctic mountains into these dry valley areas, but very little other precipitation makes its way down into there. So it's also the windiest continent on Earth, and one of the analogies I use with students is, if they take a breakfast bowl and turn it upside down, that's about the shape of Antarctica, an upside down bowl. And again, because of the gravity down at the pole there, the gravity pulls both the continental, the landmass, the ice, but it also drags the wind down. So these polar vortexes gather up at the pole and actually go swirling and whooshing in a katabatic state all the way out to the coastline. And also because the air mass out in the ocean is a little warmer than it is in the center of the continent, that sort of sucks that air down as well. So it's an incredibly windy place, windiest place on Earth. And I'm told by our penguin keepers here that it's the only place where you might see penguins flying, because occasionally they do get blown away if they hadn't managed to get themselves into a huddle or get into the sea prior to it actually getting that horrendously windy. Highest continent on Earth, if we ironed it out, it would be about 2,000 meters high, which is just a little higher than halfway up Mount Cook, Ōtautahi Mount Cook. So it's quite the continent. And we're lucky in that we have got some fantastic technology that enables us to stay warm down in those climbs, because it's not the cold that really gets you, actually it's the wind. Now in Christchurch we've got a company called Earth, Sea, Sky, and they've got a long tradition, a long history with Antarctica. It's run by a gentleman called Dave Ellis, and his father and his grandfather both had associations with Antarctica. And those clothes that you see all those scientists and support crew wearing are now standard issue for our personnel that go down to Antarctica. All Christchurch made, and does provide a wonderful lesson plan with regards to fabric technology, because there's so many different fabrics involved in these clothes. That one jacket alone has about 9 different fabrics sourced from 4 different countries, and lots of different aspects to those out clothing items that do help to keep people warm and windproof. So I've got a little picture here that shows what the storm room looks like inside, and a wee video to show what it's like when you get in there. Now I can't show it when it's actually stormy because it gets pretty much pitch black in there, so unfortunately you'll just have to imagine, but this does show a little bit what it's like inside. Heading in, we have some beautiful imagery, and then kids love to play on the skidoos, and that's all before we actually turn the storm on. And then when the storm is on, it lasts for 5 minutes, the wind squeals up, the kids squeal about, and it's great fun. It is certainly one of the most popular parts of the attraction. Okay, so lots of people want to know again, well, how do you get down there? We're very fortunate that we're one of 5 gateway cities. So we became a gateway city way back when the early explorers were out and about doing their thing, because Lyttelton Port was the last port of call prior to heading down to Antarctica. So nowadays we fly down in those large grey planes, the C-17, one just left. Just came back yesterday again. They've been shuttling people down there for the last couple of weeks as the summer sun has returned to Antarctica. So it takes 5 hours to fly down there in a C-17, or 7 hours in a Hercules. You can also leave from Hobart in Australia Cape Town in Africa, Ushuaia in Argentina, and Punta Arenas in Chile. But those are pretty much the 5 gateway cities where you can head down to Antarctica. From South America, from Ushuaia or Punta Arenas, that's the shortest distance, but it does cross one of the choppiest stretches of water on the planet. So I'm told that's quite an exciting ride. Then there's the question of, why is Antarctica so special? Why do people want to go down there? What's the point of going and to the coldest, driest, windiest, highest continent on Earth? And one of the draw cards for Antarctica, one of the things that draws people back time and time again, is the idea of that exploration and expedition. So it is home to some of the most incredible stories of exploration and survival, determination and courage and adventure. I know as a young child, I would avidly read about Shackleton and Scott and Amundsen and wonder what it was that took them down there. And I still read their stories with absolute awe now that I know a little more about the place. It's governed by the Antarctic Treaty, which is a unique example of global cooperation. We've got another wee message on that in a little while. And it supports the biggest ice sheet in the world. And if that melts, sea level will rise 60 meters. And I think that that sort of fact is something that is becoming a lot more known and understood, and perhaps concerned about by many people on the planet at the moment. Takes up 10% of the Earth's surface, so it's quite a large land mass, and 70% of the world's fresh water is tied up in that ice, and we'd prefer that it stay tied up in that ice. Antarctica drives climate and ocean circulation of the planet, and the ice cores that have been retrieved from there contain crucial information on climate studies. It also hosts unique ecosystems, aiding research on life forms in extreme environments. And the marine environment down there is the basis of food chains throughout the planet. So quite the special place. So in terms of education, these are the programs that we have on offer. And given the scope of Antarctica, I've brought the education programs back into line just with our current New Zealand curriculum. And I know it doesn't say technology education as one of those major 3, but that strand runs right throughout the others: the social science, the science, and the environmental conservation. So I also offer just a generalized Experience Antarctica option, or if people want something more specialized, I can put that together as well. So the base price for New Zealand primary, secondary, and tertiary is just $12 entry, and that is entry to all of the attractions in the main building, other than the 4D movie, which is an added extra, and the Haglin ride is also an added extra. But for your $12, you get a guided tour, you get an education program, and most of the other attractions that we have on offer. So it's a pretty good value. Just having a look at some of the programs that we offer. So under our social science, one of the most popular ones is expeditions and exploration. People want to know about Scott and Amundsen's race to the pole. They want to know about Shackleton's voyage. They want to know about, lots of the reasons that took people down there and the stories that happened to them along the way. And that's certainly the storytelling involved in those grand expeditions does intrigue and excite and educate our guests of all ages. So also, as far as the expeditions and exploration goes, with a nod to technology, the different methods of transportation used in polar exploration is quite something to behold as well, from huskies and ponies to skis and motorized sledges and tractors and snowcats and haglins and snowmobiles, and all manner of different ways of getting about in those conditions, those extreme conditions, and of course over that type of terrain, which is quite challenging at the best of times. So talking about huskies, we're pretty lucky. We actually have huskies here in the centre. We have husky handlers who bring in a range of huskies each day. Our husky handler has 9 huskies, and each day a selection of them are chosen to come into the centre to help teach us about survival, to help teach us about why huskies were down in Antarctica, and to really tell their story. So there are no huskies in Antarctica anymore. The last ones came out in 1994. There was a concern that they may pass on diseases to some of the other endemic species, and also there were more options for travelling about, so the huskies sort of became surplus to requirements, although I know that there are a lot of people that still feel they were an intrinsic part of the bases down there and part of the Antarctic story, and would love to see them down there again, but that's not something that's going to happen. Our huskies also provide a great opportunity for lessons on adaptations, and I have to show you what our real ones look like. Now, this wee girl here, her name is Manaki. She's just 6 months old. She's enormous. She was a tiny wee toy-sized puppy when she arrived 6 months ago, and she's the biggest dog in the centre now, Alaskan Malamute. She has grown, but she's still puppy by nature and hasn't quite figured out that she's grown too big to sort of lollop all over people. But here's our short idea of what our husky presentation covers and looks like. So we can talk about the adaptations, the different breeds, what the dogs were doing down there. And then, of course, there's the husky pats. So there's a special little place called the Husky Zone, which is always one of the most popular areas of the centre, where you can actually go and pat the huskies and talk to the husky handlers and imagine what it was like down in Antarctica when those beautiful animals were down there. Husky handlers have got lots of stories that they've heard from people that have come into the centre that were actually down in Antarctica when the dogs were there. So quite exciting. But of course, now we have these. These were often referred to as the tin dogs after they took the dogs out. So these are our Haglunds. They are all-terrain vehicles, and they provide quite the exciting ride around the exterior of our Antarctic campus. They go over this pseudo crevasse. They go through all sorts of bumps and angles and finish splashing down into a pond because they're also amphibious vehicles. So everybody comes back grinning from those, and the Haglund drivers will tell you that they're really grateful that they can't hear what's happening in the back cabin, because we know that the screaming that goes on in there as people enjoy their ride is quite the noise. So also under our social sciences program, we do talk about the Antarctic Treaty and other agreements which cover things such as fisheries and environmental impacts. So the Antarctic Treaty was originally signed by 12 countries, and there are now 57 nations party to the treaty, but they don't all have the same voting rights. The 12 flags in the centre of the continent there are the flags from the 12 original signatories, and the others are the other nations that have joined since. It's certainly an area that is becoming of more interest to schools, and I have had a number of requests this year for lessons regarding how that treaty works and why does it work so well down in Antarctica, but we can't emulate that type of peaceful purpose anywhere else on the planet. Interesting times. We do have our treaty information in our area called the gallery. Gallery is a large room in the centre here that's got a number of different elements to it. It's got this beautiful thing called the orrery. An orrery a mechanical device that helps us understand the seasons, and particularly why in Antarctica they have darkness. Certainly at Scott Amundsen Base, right in the middle of Antarctica, the South Pole base, they have darkness for 6 months of the year. So just about 2 weeks ago, the sun first rose out at Scott Base since its last sunset in March. So they're getting very excited now that they actually have some hours of daylight. Also in this area, in the gallery, we've got information on the rocks and fossils. We've got information on geology and biodiversity and geography, and what it's like at the bases. There's a little polar camp down there, a sled one can look at, and one of the most popular aspects in our gallery is a thing called the Polar Challenge, which is an area where you can just put your hand, actually it's just in a bucket of icy water, but people like to see how long they can leave their hands in there for, emulating what it would be like to be actually in the water down at Scott Base. So quite a bit of fun. And I've got a wee example here of actually what the orrery looks like in motion. So quite the idea of how the sun's rays don't reach Antarctica during winter because of the tilt of the planet. Just really helps children and adults understand how that seasonal variation works. So one of our other social science programs is on human factor, and this is basically looking at how the continent shapes man and how man shapes the continent. We're looking at the technology down there, the old whaling stations on the subantarctic islands, some of the stories again about explorers, the science that's happening, and the bases down there. There's quite some amazing looking bases and what the science is that's going on down in those bases. And getting into the science side of things, one of the most popular programs for science is the idea of the interconnectedness between land, sea, and sky. Much of the Antarctic research at the moment is seeking to understand what's happening to the ice, what's happening to the glaciers down there, what's happening to the ocean, what's happening in the atmosphere. So trying to put all the pieces of that puzzle together to better understand the climate change down there and the effect that it's having not just on the immediate area, but further afield if we get into things like global conveyor belts and ice melt and other areas of concern, let's say. But there are some incredibly diverse ice formations down there. People often think of Antarctica just as being one big flat whiteness, but it certainly isn't. There's a whole large polar plateau shown on that left-hand side there. And then the right-hand upper screen shows us an ice shelf. So these are basically where glaciers have come down from the polar plateau and have actually made their way right out across the edge of the continent out into the ocean. So underneath that large ice shelf is actually water, and great big hunks of those ice shelves do carve off and become icebergs. Down in the bottom left corner, we've got our sea ice. Sea ice forms all around the outside of Antarctica, particularly in winter, breaks up a little bit more in spring and summer. But again, sea ice is incredibly important as it's home to things like the algae, which form the basis of some of the food webs down there. And sea ice is also part of the breeding ground for our emperor penguins, which I'll talk to a little bit later. And there's a beautiful iceberg in the bottom right corner. So lots of different types of ice formation. Now here's a picture that was taken from the voyage that went down, ocean voyage that went down over this last summer, a joint voyage between New Zealanders and Italians, went down to do a lot of science. What we're looking at there is the leading edge of the Ross ice shelf. It was known to those early explorers as the barrier. You can see why it's called a barrier. Pretty hard to get up onto that thing. We're probably looking at something about 50 meters high there. So quite the sight. And you can imagine cruising past there in a boat, just wondering how on earth those early explorers would have felt when they were met with such sights. Land formations, lots of other land formations in Antarctica. So we've got our frozen lakes in those valleys. There are volcanoes, that's Mount Erebus smoking away there. Mountain chains. The highest mountain in Antarctica, Vincent Massif, is nearly 5,000 meters high. So again, quite a reasonable height. Beaches, and of course those dry valleys again, where I spent time in a tent. Can't believe I did that, but there we go. One of the other areas of interest with our students are our food webs and our ecosystems. This diagram just shows the complexity of that. So Antarctic waters are home to a really diverse marine life, including krill, which is a crucial part of the marine food web. And climate change impacts such as ocean warming and acidification are threatening these ecosystems and the species that are dependent on them. So that's another topic that we do broach with our schools that come to visit. And also in science, and this again is quite a popular one, is the idea of the animal adaptations. So this fits with the secondary achievement standard in earth and space science. And we have the good fortune to actually have penguins here in the Antarctic Centre. They are New Zealand little blue penguins, not Antarctic penguins, but they certainly provide a lot of fun for people and a lot of learning and knowledge as well. And even though the students can't use husky examples for their assignments, the adaptations on our huskies provide a great hands-on opportunity to explore adaptations firsthand sometimes. So our penguins, we are home to 15 little korora, little blue penguins. They've all encountered some difficulty in their life, which means that they would not be able to survive down in the wilds anymore. They've all been checked over by a vet that's basically said, these guys need a better chance in life than being released into the wild. So they come and live here. In a lot of cases, they've encountered something that's been a problem posed by mankind. We've got a penguin that's been hit by a jet ski, some that have encountered cars on the road, some that have been bitten by dogs. Also, there are those that have encountered a predator out at sea, or have just got some disability that we're not even sure how it came about. We've got one poor penguin here who's got a phobia of water, which is a little difficult if you are a penguin, but she is being encouraged to just take life gently on the beach, and every now and then manages to be brave enough to enter the water. So I've got a wee video here of what it looks like in our penguin enclosure, and see our little blue penguins as they jump into the water and have a wee dive. So there they are in our pool. We have 2 feeding sessions a day, and they are usually very well attended by the public. Our penguin keepers entice them in with the wee fish, and they swim up and grab something to eat, and off they go again. So that's quite lovely to be able to have those penguins here with us. So the other major program we offer are the environmental conservation ones, and in an attempt to introduce the concept of why there are some environmental concerns, I very briefly talk about the changes since the Industrial Revolution and why it is that we're seeing such warmer temperatures and the impact that these warmer temperatures are having down in Antarctica. One of the main issues, of course, is the ice melt, which is creating the loss of penguin breeding ground, if we're talking solely Antarctica. This means that there's less ability for our emperor penguins to have successful breeding seasons. In fact, the last 2 breeding seasons, we've lost a lot of our emperor penguin chicks because the sea ice that they breed on has simply melted out from underneath them before the chicks have had the opportunity to grow their waterproof feathers to fledge successfully. And telling those sort of stories is something that helps our audience really identify with and appreciate the complexities and the concerns of that global warming issue. Science that's happening down in Antarctica. There's a lot of work on, a lot of work involving measurements and data gathering, a lot of laser technology measuring ice shelf thickness, ice core drilling for samples, providing information about past climates, submersibles. So really from space and from under the ice itself and through the ice, there's a lot of work being done to try to understand what's happening and how things have been in the past, and then extrapolate some information about what might be going to happen in the future. The other program we offer under our environmental conservation is looking at tourism down in Antarctica. This has become an increasingly popular thing to do, despite the fact that it's quite some substantial sum of money to actually jump on one of those things and go down to Antarctica. But last season, there were about 100,000 tourists to Antarctica. So that is certainly showing that it is very popular down there. And while there are many negatives, one positive to tourism is the fact that it can be both inspirational and educational and foster public support and investment for the continent's protection. So there are definitely pros and cons to that tourism. If you are going down there by boat, you do need to take one of the IATO members with you. IATO is an organisation that was founded to advocate and promote practice of safe and environmentally responsible private sector travel to Antarctica, and they do have IATO representatives on those tourist ships that go down there, helping to protect the wildlife, respect the protected areas, respect scientific research, keep the area pristine, and to be safe. That gentleman lying down on the ice there is showing one of the behavioural activities of humans down in Antarctica. They are not allowed to approach the penguins, but if you're just sitting there and a penguin approaches you, that's absolutely fine. The penguins don't have any fear of humans because they haven't been harmed by them to date. So they'll go up and inspect a human, just wondering what on earth this strange thing is in its territory. So as long as you don't get picked or hit by one of those flippers, which I understand packs a mighty punch, it's quite fine just to sit there and be inspected by a penguin. And one of the things that we also offer is our Ice Voyage 4D movie attraction. So again, if you're taking school groups to the Antarctic Centre, this is an added extra, but it's great fun. We travel to Antarctica and to South Georgia on a polar icebreaker, and just see penguins and sea lions and seals and all manner of fun Antarctic things. And it's just a bit of fun. Have a bit of snow come down at you, and a few other special effects that just provide just a bit of fun, part of the attraction. So when I finish with schools, I like to finish by showing this beautiful ventifact rock. Ventifacts have been formed by millions of tiny grains of sand polishing the rock over millions of years. And these ventifacts often have quite sharp edges. They're not quite sure in some cases how they have come to have those sharp edges, but there's a theory that the wind blasts it on one side and then that actually manages to turn it and blasts it on another side, and it turns again. But I have a whakatauki that goes with the Ventafacts. And the whakatauki says, Mā te wā ka omuri te pahutu ina matarehu. Over time, small grains polish the stone. And I like to try to engage students to think about the small things that they can do on a daily or regular basis that are going to make a difference over time, that the troubles and concerns that we're facing as a species and as a planet are able to be countered to some degree just by our small actions over time, things that we know are going to make a difference, like our recycling, like our use of resources in such a way that isn't wasteful, just things like putting our dog on a leash at the beach if we know that there are penguins around, just little daily habits, the small things over time that will make a difference. And in that way, just hoping to influence people to think a little more clearly and deeply about this beautiful planet that we live on. And then we just come to the end of our presentation, and as the sun sets, that's pretty much where I finish my presentation and where we often finish our tours of the International Antarctic Centre. So I hope you've enjoyed that and learned a little bit more. Thank you for being part of our International Antarctic Centre.
Thank you, Boo. That was incredible. I've learned a lot. I visited the Antarctic Centre last year with my family and experienced the whole lot and
Great.
absolutely enjoyed it. But that just added to my experience, actually. So that was awesome. I do have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Um, so, with Antarctica being 50 times the size of Aotearoa, is any of Antarctica undiscovered?
Well, that's a very good question. There are certainly areas in there that haven't been crisscrossed by mankind. I wouldn't say undiscovered, because with our satellite technology from space now, of course, you can see most things, most places, but there definitely be parts of Antarctica that haven't had mankind visit at
Mm.
this particular time. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's just such a
good
vast
question.
continent. So,
Mm, mm.
and also, I just want to take you back to your trip in 2003 to Antarctica. What was an exact? You mentioned that you went there and created some resources for education. Can you give me an example of like something you created or what you came away with for education from that trip?
So, my project was on the geology of Antarctica, helping people understand Antarctica's place in time and space, basically, how it got to be there. So I made 15 different kits that went into resource centres around New Zealand. And they included things like a selection of the types of rocks that you do find down in Antarctica. Now, when I was down there, I wasn't allowed to collect any rocks. You're not allowed to take any rocks out of there. Well, not just low-level scientists like me. The really important people can. But I was gifted some rocks when I returned, and I've also had the opportunity just to sample some from other people's collections and actually just go to rock shops and buy some. So examples of fossils, examples of the different rock types, the metamorphics, the igneuses and the sedimentaries that you find down in Antarctica. Also just lots of different activities that people can do to help them understand why the rocks form the way they do, how those rocks might react under millions of years of other circumstances, a lot of work around things like those ventafacts, how they may have come to be formed. So yes, those kits were in resource centres. Heaven knows where they are now. I know I've kept a couple and I do use some of those resources here with my students still. So it was 2003 was quite a while ago. It was yeah, we certainly didn't have the technologies that we've got now, but yeah, it was a great project to do.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm just going to share my screen again just to so people can share some feedback if they want to. Um, there's a link there and also a QR code to scan to give some feedback on what you might want to see next in terms of a Wednesday webinar. And we will next month is the Luma project case study. So that will be with Beck Hebro. So that will be advertised through all our usual TENS challenge channels. So look out for that one. Put a mark in your calendar for Wednesday, the 25th of September. Thank you so much, Boo, today for presenting. And I'm just going to finish on a karakia. Kia mātou katoa, kua mutu mātou ia mātou mahi. Ia mātou kaupapa hoki, arahina mātou, kia kawe mātou ia mātou hei papa, kia whakatapu mātou ki ngā. Kaupapa me ngā mea e whakapono manaaki mai mātou. And thank you everyone.
Thank you. Kia ora.